Good evening, guys. How y'all doing? Welcome to another video of Healing Waters. This is verse 6, I think. I'm not sure. I have to check when I upload it, but I'm so glad that you guys decided to join me tonight for another verse of Healing Waters. This is actually my second time doing this video because the first time my computer decided it didn't want to cooperate. So after I recorded that whole hour-long video and I went to pull it up to upload it, it was not saved. It says something like the file couldn't be, it didn't save, and I ended up having to restart my computer and it had to update, and I almost was like, fuck it. But, I decided that I'm gonna just go ahead and do it again. And hopefully without all the interruptions that I had the first time, because I did have some. So welcome, as I said. If you are a regular viewer, thank you for coming back. Thank you for being a subscriber to my page. It actually benefits us both when you subscribe because I share a lot of very, very, very useful information. And you help me by knowing that you guys actually care about what I'm saying and that I'm just not out here, talking to myself and setting intentions to be a helpful person or, a healer, and nobody is benefiting from this but me. So, tonight we are going to go ahead and continue on with part 2 of what I started, the topic that I started last week, which is purpose, finding your purpose in your natal chart. And it'd be really good if you have your natal chart already downloaded. You can go online. There are multiple free astrology websites that will calculate your birth chart for you. All you need is your date of birth, your time of birth, and your location of birth. And they will go ahead and pull up and do the calculations for you. And you could just download it to your phone and then work through these videos with me. The two natal chart calculators that I use are AstroChart and AstroSeek. I use AstroChart just for a general overview of my natal chart. They give a little bit more information like configurations such as the yod, the rectangle, the kite, things like that. And then I use AstroSeek when I want to look at transits to my birth chart. So both of those are really good and they're free. And I encourage you guys to not just watch these videos and listen to me explain things from the perspective of my birth chart, but to pull up yours and work through yours with me. Because I do these videos just as much for you as I do them for me, actually more for you because I study my birth chart every day. So I wanted to teach astrology using myself as a case study in my own birth chart, but I want you guys to benefit from these videos, and the best way to do that is to work through your birth chart with me as I go through these videos. And if you need further interpretations or if you need further assistance with understanding your birth chart, you can always contact me. My contact information is always in the comment box, godbodyholistics@gmail.com. You can email me and schedule a birth chart consultation with me, and I'll help you walk through it. And you can ask questions, and I can answer them for you. And then hopefully we can help you better understand yourself and your life and why you're here and why you've been here and what your soul needs to gain from this lifetime in order for it to grow and evolve. So with that being said, last week I started looking into how to determine your purpose in life in your birth chart, and I introduced the North and the South Node. And at the end of the video, I touched on the 10th house a little bit because your 10th house your 10th house to me is like your obituary. At the end of the day, when it's all said and done, what did you do while you were here? What do people remember you for? What is your reputation? And I want to pick up on that, but you have to work on an axis, because if I do the 10th house, then I have to touch on the 4th house. Now think of yourself as a tree. Your 4th house is your roots, your lineage, your ancestry, the circumstances and conditions around your birth and your early life, the people that you come from, past life experiences that you brought into this life, so on and so forth. And your 10th house is going to be the fruit of that tree. So in order to know what you contribute, you have to know what is in your roots, where you come from. So a lot of people look to their 10th house, which is their midheaven, in order to determine what their career should be in this life, or what it is, or what it will be. However, it's right across from your 4th house. They're on the same axis, so it's important to know what's in your roots and the environment of your early life, your birth, and your lineage in order to know what you're capable of achieving in this life. So with that being said, pull up your birth chart, because this is going to get a little deep. And if you, my preface for this video is, if you are not Black or an African living in America, don't think you can't relate to this, because you can. There are still things that you can gain from this video. However, a lot of the things that I'll discuss will have a lot to do with ancestry, lineage, and our roots. And if you're African in America, then we'll have a lot of similar stories dealing with our roots and our ancestries, just because of how we come here and the conditions of which our ancestors were put through in order for us to even be here. So with that being said, the 4th house. As I said, the 4th house is going to deal with the roots of you, your roots, your early life, the environment of your early life, your home life, your family. It also deals with your parents. The 4th and the 10th house deals with the mother and the father. Traditionally, the 10th house is the 4th house is ruled by Cancer, and that is ruled by the moon. And astrologically speaking, the moon represents the mother in one's birth chart. And the 10th house traditionally is ruled by Saturn, because it is usually ruled by Capricorn. And Saturn, traditionally in astrology, is representative of the father, as well as the sun. However, in my chart, Saturn represents my mother, and my moon represents my father, because my moon is in my 12th house, and that is the house that deals with prison, isolations, far off places. My moon is in my 12th. My father was in prison, isolation, prison, and he was there for 20 or so years. So he was not the main contributor to my life. My mother was. She took on the role of father and mother. So in my chart, my mother and my maternal family are more representative by my 10th house. And they can be seen in my 4th house, because obviously my roots have to deal with both sides of my family. And coincidentally, my 4th house is split between Cancer and Leo, the sun and the moon, as the sun rules Leo. However, it starts in Cancer, which is why it is considered being in Cancer. So my 4th house personally, like I said, is split between Cancer and Leo. And the only planet that I have in my fourth house is Lilith. And it's not actually a planet, it is a point. It is the point of gravitational pull of the moon. So Lilith invokes a lot of preconceived ideas just because of its mythology. And Lilith, the story behind it is that Lilith was the first wife of Adam, and she was not created from his rib. She was created equal to him. They were both made from the same substance. So Lilith did not consider herself underneath Adam. She did not consider herself less than Adam. She was equal to Adam. Um, and as the story would have it, Adam didn't like that shit because he could not subdue her. She was not as submissive because she saw herself as the same as Adam. And he wanted someone who was a little bit more submissive and a little bit more subdued. So some legends say that Lilith left because she rebelled against Adam, and some would say that Adam prayed to God to remove Lilith and give him Eve. Either way, all of them agree that Lilith went off on her own, and it says that she went and found her home in a cave, and there is where she met Lucifer. Um, and they fell in love with each other and had babies, and they call them demon babies. Now, this is a story that is written by everybody who writes history, which is men, because most of history is told by men, because, well, most wars were fought by men, and so history are going to be told by the ones who won the war. Um, and Capricorn deals with history. Capricorn deals with patriarchy. It deals with control because it's ruled by Saturn, which is the father of the zodiac. So it's going to deal with limitations, discipline, control, patriarchy, um, history, old and ancient ways. So if they're the ones who are writing the stories, I consider it a little bit of bias when they tell the story of women. Um, the idea of Lilith being a mother of demons because she rebelled against Adam sounds very much like something a man would think. Now, Lilith would also be the contributor of the concept of witchcraft. And that in itself has a lot to do with patriarchy in itself. And I say that because, excuse me if you guys can hear my niece having a meltdown in the background. She always has to do these when I'm doing these videos. However, um, Lilith deals with witchcraft because of its power. Lilith was considered the first witch, and she is considered the supreme bitch and witch. I don't hold the same ideas of the word witch as history would lend us to have, because I have Lilith in my fourth house, and so I understand the way it manifests itself. I have Lilith in Leo, and that would be considered the supreme. If you guys know anything about American Horror Story, if you've watched American Horror Story Coven, then you know exactly what the supreme is. Lilith in Leo would be the supreme. It would represent a woman or a lineage of women who hold certain abilities that fell on the wrong side of history. And I say that because if depending on who's telling the story, you'll get a different story about these type of women. Now, I want to go into my Lilith in my fourth house because it deals with my roots. Lilith is in my roots, and I come from a line of women who were considered rebellious and too, they dress too provocative and they're too strong willed and very rebellious, if you ask some men in my family, and powerful women. There is a power that runs in my family that cannot be denied. And um, just like the days of old, when these type of women were burned at the stake because of their power by Christian colonizer and conquistadors, people who came into our ancient kingdoms and saw our women ruling kingdoms and holding power that they had never seen women hold because they didn't allow their women to hold that kind of power. They killed them. And those that they couldn't kill, they raped in order to subdue them. Rape subdues one's power, especially a woman. It's ciphering power from their root chakra and their solar plexus chakra, and that affects the solar plexus, sacral chakra. It affects their solar plexus, their ability to wield their own power. And so this is where these women who were oracles, who were priestesses because of the spiritual power that they held, um, got their name from, of being witches, which is considered taboo. However, back in ancient history, these women were the key to the power of a lot of our ancient civilizations and a lot of our kingdoms back in Africa and the Far East. And it wasn't until we were taken over by nations that were not the same, not same, um, that we got our name. And it's because of the power that we held. Many of us were killed because we went out fighting. We went out wielding our spiritual powers and our warrior like powers. So they had to kill us. They had to rape us and kill us because we couldn't be easily subdued. This is what is in my roots. This is why I have Lilith in my fourth house and not in my sign of Cancer, not in my sign of Eve, but in my sign of Leo, my sign of pride and royalty, which lets me know that I come from a line of royal priesthood. I know a lot of my family likes to believe that you get your spiritual powers after you become saved. However, this has been in our blood since the beginning of our time because we come from a royal priesthood, Lilith and Leo in my fourth house, in the house of my roots. Now, I want to say that my Lilith and Leo has a lot to do with my paternal side of my family, and I say that because my paternal family is a very proud people. They are extremely proud of themselves and of their heritage and of their ancestry. Um, and my maternal family, not so much. My grandmother told me the story about my great grandfather, her grandfather, who was a slave on a plantation in Luray, South Carolina, and his slave owner spit in his face at some point purposely, and my great grandfather shot him, shot his slave owner, and then fled to Florida, where he ended up in Bronson. And then that is where my paternal family came from until they migrated here to Ocala. So they are a very proud people, and they were not easily subdued, which is why the Lilith aspect of my roots is in Leo, and I attribute that to my paternal side of the family because Leo is proud, and Leo deals with the sun. Leo is ruled by the sun, which also can be the father in one's chart or the paternal side in one's chart. The moon in one's chart is more related to Eve, the mother, the Eve. And as I said, my fourth house is split between Cancer and Leo, the moon and the sun. But Lilith falls in the Leo sector of my fourth house. So that royal priesthood, that pride in our spiritual abilities comes from my paternal side. So I relate my moon more so to my father's side of the family. Just because, as I said, my father was in prison and my moon is in my 12th house. My mother was the main provider. She was the main contributor to me and my life because my father was gone. And so that would be representative more of Saturn, which rules my 10th house, 4th house, 10th house. They're both roots, but the 10th house deals with the fruit of your roots. Now, ironically, my mother is an Aquarius, and Aquarius is both ruled by Saturn and Uranus. So that's another reason why I say that I contribute my 10th house to my mother and my maternal family, just because my 10th house is in Capricorn. And Capricorn, as I said, deals with patriarchy and rigid thinking and control and limitations, as well as old structures and systems such as religion as we know it today. And my maternal side of the family is very, very religiously controlled. Their beliefs are the beliefs that were forced onto them. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with one choosing to continue to practice Christianity. However, in my family, it was forced on us. It was the belief that our parents had, and so it is the belief that they forced on us, and nothing else was accepted in my maternal family. No other belief system would have been acceptable as it remains today. And that is inherited from our experience with slavery, because Christianity was used as a tool to subdue and control and indoctrinate slaves, Africans. And they had to assimilate to it in order to survive, because back in those days, you could be killed for being caught practicing anything that you brought with you from Africa. That was their way of breaking you from your power, because that's what we were when we were there. We were powerful people, and we were the ancient civilizations that everyone reads about that enlightened the rest of the world. But in order for them to steal that from us, they had to wipe it out of us. So we weren't allowed to speak our native tongues. We had to speak English, something that they understood, so that they can understand what the fuck we were saying, and also so that we wouldn't be connected to our lineage, our ancestry. We were not allowed to practice our African traditions. We were forced into Christianity by violence, by death, by beatings. Um, and that also is why you see a difference in black churches and white churches. It's because black churches assimilated in order to survive, but you can't you can't really disconnect the people from what is inherently theirs. And spirituality is a part of our genetic makeup. You can't take it away from us. So, yes, we built churches, and yes, we did what Master said. We read the Bible, we studied the Bible, we praised the Lord, but the speaking in tongues, the music, the drums, the dancing, you know, all of the things that you see in black churches that you don't see in white churches, that was because of our spirituality. If you go to a voodoo ceremony, it looks the same thing. It looks the same as a Baptist church. You'll hear people speaking in tongues. You'll see people falling out and being slain in the spirit. You'll hear the same music and you'll see the same dancing and movements because of the drums and the music, because it invokes or it conjures the spirit within us. That's why you see a difference in black churches and white churches. It's the spirituality. It is in our blood. It is in our DNA. However, we did what we had to do to survive, because if we didn't, we would have been killed. If we continued to practice magic, which is inherent in our spirituality, we would have been killed. That, so, that cycle continues in my maternal side of the family because nothing else but Christianity was allowed. And I want to go a step further in saying that the white brand of Christianity is what ran in my maternal side of the family, due to the men who had religious control over my family, which is my uncle, who was a pastor. He is the one who set the tone for our religious beliefs, and everyone else in my family followed in line. He was the one who placed a lot of guilt and shame onto the women in my family for uh, the power that they held within themselves as a woman. He's very much like the white men who came and enslaved us, subdue the women, and teach them white gods and white religion. My uncle upheld this tradition in our family, and um, because that was the more dominant influence in my life, that hindered me from my purpose. And I say that because Saturn, which rules my 10th house of Capricorn, is in my 8th house. And Saturn in the 8th house can produce fear because Saturn is very rigid. It is very, conservative. And the 8th house is very occultish. It has everything to do with all the shit that they burned us at the stake for. Or it has everything to do with the reason why we were forced into Christianity and not able to practice our own spirituality, because we were astrologers, we were diviners, we were priestesses, we could do magic, we had metaphysical abilities. And that is what the 8th house has to deal with, amongst other things. So Saturn in the 8th house produces fear because it's like, I don't like to be in this shit. I like to know what I know and believe what I believe, and that's that. Period. It's rigid. And it can't control the 8th house because the 8th house is taboo. It's sex, it's death, it's birth, it's rebirth, it's afterlife, it's before life. It's things that are mysterious. It's the mysterious side of life and the universe, things that Saturn can't understand due to its rigid beliefs. So, su- surprisingly and not surprisingly, my mother is, or my maternal family, instilled that fear of all things eighth house in me. Now, my mother is an Aquarius. And Aquarius is ruled by both Saturn and Uranus. And I have Saturn and Uranus in my eighth house. So the fear isn't just of those things, but it's a fear of what lies in her own blood and what lies in our own maternal lineage. Because I don't just have these spiritual abilities through my paternal family, which I do get a lot of spiritual abilities from my paternal family, but I also inherit them from my maternal family, which is why um, my moon is in the 12th house of spirituality and karma, inherited spirituality, and my Saturn, which rules my mother, is in my 8th house of karma and spirituality, spiritual practices, actually. Um, so, the house that rules my 10th house, which is another aspect of purpose, um, what one contributes to the world, what one's reputation is. It could be your career. Most of the time, you look to your 10th house for your career. My 10th house is ruled by Saturn, and my Saturn is in my 8th house of the occult, of karmic occult practices at that. And it's in there with Uranus, which is your astrologer, in the 8th house of astrology and all of those other mysterious occultic gifts and abilities. However, what kept me from my 10th house, and your 10th house is considered your midheaven, and in my natal chart, every aspect to my midheaven is a square. Venus square my midheaven, Mars square my midheaven, Jupiter square my midheaven. There is no trine, sextile, or conjunction to my midheaven. Everything is squaring it. So that means that it's more difficult for me to find my purpose in my career. I also have a north node in the 12th house, and that is very elusive. So even my 12th house purpose was difficult for me to see and understand. For one, because it's in the 12th house ruled by Pisces and Neptune. It's very foggy, but it's very spiritual. And the ruler of my 10th house is in the 8th house, which is very spiritual and karmic. However, all the aspects to it are a square, which means there are more challenges for me to overcome in order for me to find my purpose and make a career out of it. And why is it so challenging? Well, for one, because of my roots, because of my 4th house, because of what's in my lineage and what is in my ancestry. We were slaves. We were forbidden from practicing our spirituality. And both the ruler of my 10th house purpose, tangible purpose, and my north node spiritual purpose are both in spiritual houses. So either way you slice it and cut it, my purpose has to deal with my spirituality that I inherited. Not to mention, my north node is in Aries, meaning being the first to step out and make a career. Make a career, because Aries is your entrepreneur. Make a career out of your spirituality. And for me, being the first one to do that in a family where our whole ancestry deals with being cut off from our spirituality and our spiritual practices because of that being passed down, because of the effects of oppression, excuse me, being passed down through my roots, through generations of my roots, and down to me. I karmically inherited situations that made it difficult for me to, one, find out what my purpose is, and two, actually be able to assert myself in it. I have Lilith in Leo. That is the sign of assertiveness and expressing yourself. A Leo is going to be a Leo. They're going to seek the attention that they deserve. They're going to be themselves. It's ruled by the sun. You can't hide the sun. The sun is expressive. It seeks attention. It draws attention, which is why Leo degrees are considered fame degrees. If you have any degree in Leo, there's a good chance that you could become famous or well known for whatever whatever that degree is expressing itself in, because Leos are known for being famous. So my Lilith is in Leo, and I also have another Leo placement, but we'll get to that in a second. So it is meant for me to be proud and express my ancestry, my lineage, and the things that run in my blood. However, it's been difficult for me to do that because of the effects of oppression that happened in my ancestry and my roots. And that's why I say a lot of Africans and Americans, a lot of Black people, if you're watching this, we share the same roots. Our fourth house struggles are going to be similar because of the effects of what we went through. However, it may not be as difficult for you if your North Node and your 10th house don't have to do with a spiritual purpose. Mine does. And so I've had a lot more to overcome in order to, like I said, for one, understand what my purpose was in my North Node, what my soul needed to do in this lifetime, which has to do with 12th house spirituality, as well as my 10th house having to do with making a career out of what I'm supposed to do, which involves my 8th house, because Saturn is in my 8th house. So my 8th house is in Sagittarius. And 8th house in Sagittarius produces the sages, it produces the gurus, it produces the shamans and the spiritual teachers, and not just spiritual teachers, but occult teachers. People like Helena Blavatsky have 8th house in Sagittarius, like myself, and she was considered a supreme in the occult. She was a great occultist, and I actually admire her. I admire her work. We have the same 8th house in Sagittarius placement. She taught a lot of 8th house things, meaning she shed light on things that were considered taboo in the 8th house. And even though they're still kind of considered taboo, even though now not so much, because we're in the age of Aquarius and it's more free thinking. However, up until recently, she was shunned by any community that is not the occult community, because we were in a Piscean age, and that is the age of Christianity and patriarchy. So Carl Jung, the famous psychologist and occultist, who taught a lot about inner workings of the brain, that also is 8th house. 8th house deals with psychology. He also had 8th house in Sagittarius, and he was a world-renowned psychologist who taught a lot about the inner workings of the mind and the anima and the shadow self. And the 8th house, Scorpio, because the 8th house is traditionally ruled by Scorpio, represents one's shadow self, the side of oneself that you need to embrace in order for one to go through a full transformation and full realization of itself, because you have to know your inner workings and embrace your inner workings in order to understand yourself completely. You can't only look at the light side of yourself, the things that you see on the surface, and think that you really know yourself. And then everything else that you consider dark and unsavory within yourself, you blame it on the devil, which is where you get the devil card in tarot. It's not some character from the Bible. It is your shadow self and um, the things that you need to see in yourself in order to grow and transform yourself. Because if you continue to blame it on another entity, you never really take accountability, which is why you have so many judgmental Christians, because everything within themselves that they don't like, they blame it on the devil. But the devil is just your lower self. It's just another aspect of yourself. Um, God said He created light and darkness, good and evil. So who is the devil? So, anyways, eighth house in Sagittarius produces a wise teacher of occult things. My eighth house is in Sagittarius. Um, but for me, you can't really be a wise teacher in these matters unless either you have some placements there that coincide with that, or unless it runs in your lineage and it's karmic, meaning you can pull that information from your inner self because it is in your DNA and your ancestry. You're pulling it from past lives. Well, since the eighth house has a lot to do with karma and past lives as well, I would say for me it's a little bit of both. Not only do I pull it from my past lives experience and my ancestry, my karma, but I also have Uranus in my eighth house. Um, and that makes one a very good astrologer. It makes one a good diviner or tarot reader. It makes one, it enhances those eighth house abilities because Uranus is one of your spiritual houses as well, spiritual planets as well. So from my North Node in my 12th house, being my soul's purpose, what I need to experience and learn in this lifetime, to the ruler of my 10th house being in my 8th house. Both houses deal with occult. Both houses deal with spirituality and hidden things. Both houses deal with karma. So all of my purpose are tied into my 8th and my 12th house. The things that I'm supposed to do in this life involving my 10th house are in my 12th and my 8th house. And I don't have any planets in my 10th house for me to draw on. For instance, if you have a planet in your 10th house, you can look at that planet, look at what aspects it has to the other planets in your chart, and you can get a really good idea of what it is you're supposed to do in this lifetime, which is why people look to their 10th house for their career. However, if you don't have any planet on there, it doesn't mean that you're not supposed to contribute anything to this world or that you won't have a career. It just means to look to the ruler of your 10th house and see where that planet is and what sign it's in and what house it's in and what it's aspecting to find what you're supposed to do. Like I said, my 10th house has a lot to do with my 8th house because my ruler of my 10th house is in my 8th house. And it also has a lot to do with my mother because the ruler of my 10th house is also the ruler of the sign of Aquarius, which is my mother. My mother has 7 planets in Aquarius. She has a wham bam, thank you ma'am, triple whammy of a stellium in Aquarius. That is more than half of her zodiac It's in Aquarius. And it's there because she has to learn to not be so rigid in her thinking, because Aquarius rules a free thinker. We're in the age of Aquarius now. That's why you see people leaving the church so much. It's because we're in the age of Aquarius where people are able to think and deduce things for themselves. No more cult following, no more indoctrination. We want to think for ourselves and be independent. Aquarius are free thinkers and they're independent and they're innovators. So if you have 7 planets there, it's almost God's way of saying all of your focus needs to be on things that are Aquarian. My mother is very rigid in her beliefs. And that comes from her family, my maternal side of the family. Like I said, my uncle was our pastor. Um, her older brother. And I won't speak a lot on their personal relationship because that's not my story to tell. But I know that a lot of, well, all of my family's beliefs were shaped and molded by my uncle, um, as he was our spiritual leader. My uncle is a great teacher. I'll give that. He's a great teacher and he was a great pastor. He was more than a preacher, he was a teacher. Um, However, my mother needed to learn how to not be so rigid in her beliefs. And not only does all of her planets in Aquarius allude to that, I'll share with you guys a dream that I had that has to do with all of this. In about 2018, I had a dream that I was naked like an avatar, standing in a dark room, just standing there at attention. It was more like I was an avatar, almost as if I hadn't been made alive or had a spirit in me yet, just an avatar. And there was a woman next to me, and that woman was my mother. And she was standing in the same position as an avatar. And there was an old woman who came into the room. It was a dark room. And she was dressed as if she was from slavery days. I say that because of her attire. She had on a head wrap, a head scarf, and she had on clothes that I recognized from a lot of slave movies. An old woman. And she walked up to my mother and she walked around her in a circle. And as she did this, she sized her up and down as if she was inspecting her. Walked around, looked at her in her face, looked at her like this, looked at her like this, walked behind her, checked her out, looked at her. She did that for a few times and then she walked over to me and she repeated the same thing. She walked around, looked me in my face, walked behind me, checked me out, as if she was trying to decide whose avatar she was going to put herself in. So after she sized me up, she stood in front of me and she put her hands up like this. And then this is the first time that I moved in my dream. I put my hands up like this, and then we locked hands like this. And then when we did that, I saw, what electricity looks like or lightning looks like. It has that blue tint to it of electricity. Well, when we did this, electricity start flowing through my arms and up my body. And I won't say that I just saw it in the dream, but once it reached, because I watched it, it was as if I was being electrocuted. That's what it felt like in the dream. And once it took over my whole body, I was jolted from my dream. And I sat up in bed and I was shaking. I was shaking. My whole body was still trembling. I could still feel the electricity running through my body. And my husband can feel it because as soon as I jolted up, he jolted up and was like, "What was that?" And I was like, "I just had the strangest dream." And then I told him about it. And then, he went back to sleep. But I had to wait for my body to stop tingling before I could, fall back asleep because I still had electric currents running through my body. Now, I didn't need any interpretation for that dream. I instantly knew what had happened. And what I saw, what had happened was I saw that when I was born, a mantle was passed on to me. It is a mantle, and when I say mantle, if you remember in the Bible the story of Elijah before he got caught up in the chariot and taken off into the sky in a cloud of fire, he passed his cloak, his mantle, unto Elisha, meaning because Elisha asked for it. He knew that Elijah was getting ready to leave, and he had studied under him, and he had been his protege. And now that Elijah was getting ready to leave and be caught up, he wanted that power for himself now so that he can carry on. So Elisha, before he left, passed his mantle on to Elisha. That is what happened to me in that dream. That woman in that dream was one of my maternal ancestors. And I know that because my mother was being inspected for the mantle to be passed on to her. But for some reason, it wasn't passed on to her. It skipped down to me. And I didn't understand why it didn't pass on to her until I started to learn more about my birth chart. As I studied my birth chart, I studied my parents' birth chart. And that's when I found out that my mother had 7 planets in Aquarius. And the reason why the mantle was passed on to me and not her was because of her thinking, of her beliefs. They were too rigid for her to step outside of the indoctrination and all of the beliefs that no longer serve us anymore and follow the mantle of our ancestors. So the gifts that our ancestors had, that we brought with us, the spirituality that we brought with us that was beat out of us as we were forced into Christianity, they needed to return. They needed to return because that oppression wasn't supposed to last forever. We assimilated into Christianity in order to survive, but as one of my friends on Facebook put it today, it wasn't meant for the generations that were free from slavery. We don't have to practice that anymore because it doesn't serve us anymore. It served us then because the spirits knew that we would be killed if we did not at least appear to be Christians. So even back then, when we were in slavery and in eras after slavery that were still equally oppressive, it was still useful for us to be the church. And the spirit was with us in the church, which is why in the civil rights era and things like that, the church was such a strong foundation to all of our movements because our ancestors and our spirits that we brought with us from Africa assimilated with us for our survival. However, once they helped us to free ourselves to the point where we are now, it's like, okay, we don't need that anymore. You can come out of that, come out of her, come out of that and reassert yourselves. You don't have to be ashamed to be who you are anymore. Put yourself back in your power. They're not burning you at the stake anymore. They're not killing you for having metaphysical powers. If anything, nowadays, everybody wants them. However, many of our generations before us, and I'm speaking to my generations, have not let it go. Um, I spoke about this in my video, um, the Exodus, then and now, and I talked about um, the generation that couldn't go into the promised land because they wouldn't come out of the habits and beliefs that they picked up in slavery. It's the same thing. So the mantle wasn't passed on to my mother because she still needed to practice being an Aquarius, change the way she thinks, be more free thinking, and come out of the other side of Saturn, which is Capricorn. The rigid beliefs, the oppressive beliefs, indoctrination and control, religious control. The mantle was passed on to me, and all of my purposes for this lifetime revolve around that spirituality that is in my roots, that was inherited in my roots. So, this is why I say that when you're looking for your purpose, it's also good to know what's in your root. And not saying that everybody is going to have roots like mine. Everybody's purpose isn't going to be like mine. Everybody isn't meant to be spiritualists or teach spirituality. Because, like I said, 8th house and Sagittarius is your spiritual teacher. Sagittarius is a traditional ruler of the 9th house, which is your house of spirituality because it's a house of higher thinking, philosophy, and religion. Now, my uncle, the pastor that I was telling you guys about, he has Neptune in Sagittarius in his 9th house. I have Neptune and Sagittarius in my 9th house because Sagittarius rules my 8th and 9th house. When I looked up the natal charts of my elders, meaning my mother and her siblings and my maternal grandparents, my uncle and I are the only ones who have Neptune in our 9th house of Sagittarius. He is a spiritual teacher. I am a spiritual teacher, but his Neptune is in the degree of Pisces. My Neptune is in the degree of Leo. So Pisces deals with Christianity as it is representative of the Piscean age, the age of Christianity. My Neptune is in the degree of a Leo. And what did I tell you is in my sign of Leo? Lilith. So for most people, it would say that she's meant to be a witch. I don't call it that. I call it a high priestess because that's what it was called back in the days of my ancestors. We weren't calling each other witches in Africa and in Egypt. We were called oracles and we were called queens because even the queens and the queen mothers had to be spiritual because a woman is inherently spiritual. We are the spiritual aspect of the Godhead. We are the Binah of the tree. We are the wisdom, and religion will be the chokmah, the understanding. We are the high priestess, and religion is the hierophant. One is masculine, one is feminine. Feminine is the spiritual aspect of God. We are conduits of spirituality. It is inherent in us, which is why we give birth. Through our waters, we give birth. Through our wombs, we give birth. We form spirits in our womb. A man doesn't hold a spirit in their womb. We do. So we are conduits of spirituality. Our vaginas are portals. We aren't witches. We are powerful. And that is the lineage that I come from. I come from women who, and I'm not speaking figuratively anymore, I'm speaking physically. I come from a line of a royal priesthood, women who served as king, as queens, as rulers, or served next to kings, which is why they consider that rebellious streak in us, that Lilith, because we were never Eve-like. We reigned next to kings. We were equal to kings. We were equal advisors. So the king didn't make any decision unless he considered the oracle, which was us. However, due to slavery and due to years of oppression, that was passed down because it became engraved in our DNA and in our minds. So it became karmic. It became karma. I inherited it, and my Saturn in my eighth house, like I said, produces fear. It produces fear of eighth house shit. And so I mentioned that I had a lot of squares to my midhaven. Those squares were fear. Those squares were karma that I inherited, that I have to work through in order to reinstate my ancestral spirituality, because that is my purpose. Aries North Node in the 12th house. To be the first one to reinstate our ancestral spirituality. Aries North Node in the 12th house, and the ruler of my 10th house of my career being in the 8th house. The spiritual teacher, the spiritual practitioner, because it's conjunct Uranus. Uranus is in my 8th house. So me doing this, what I'm doing right now, is me showing you guys that I'm living my purpose just by doing this video. I'm teaching you guys astrology, doing these videos. In some of my other videos, I do readings. That's Uranus in the 8th house, your tarot reader, your diviner. But it's conjunct my Saturn, which rules my 10th house, my career, my purpose, what I do, what I contribute to the world. So it is my contribution to the world, and it is me fulfilling my purpose to pull from my roots and teach you guys these matters. Pulling from my roots, using myself as a case study to teach you guys astrology and to help you find your own purpose, which is another thing that deals with my North Node and Aries in the 12th house, because it deals with service. Me teaching you guys how to find yourselves. Aries North Node, helping you find your purpose. All of this is me working out my purpose. And I hope that this helped you understand a little bit more about your 4th house and your 10th house axis and how your roots contribute to what you do. As I said, not everybody is going to have their 10th house that involves any kind of spiritual practice. You can have a 10th house that's in Capricorn, but you may have, say for instance, the sun in your 10th house. I know someone with the sun in their 10th house. And Leo is ruled by the sun. And 10th house has a lot to do with institution. Capricorn has a lot to do with institutions, hard work, career orientation. This person is an engineer. And you can see it based on not just their 10th house, but aspects to their 10th house. Their North Node is also in their 10th house. So their career is their purpose. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Their North Node is in their 10th house. Their Sun is in their 10th house. This person could also be famous for something else, because a lot of presidents have Leo sons. And strong Capricorn placements, for instance, a sun in Capricorn, or something like that. Um, but everybody's purpose isn't the same. However, through your north node and your south node, and through your fourth house and your 10th house, that is how you can determine not just your career purpose, but also the purpose that your soul needs to experience in order for it to evolve. And sometimes they can be the one and the same. Sometimes you can make a career, or you're meant to make a career out of the experience that your soul needs to experience here. And sometimes they're completely different, but a lot of times they can be the same. You can make them the same if you want them to be the same, because your job can always be your job, but you can also do other things to fulfill yourself. Some people have jobs that they do just to get by. My South Node is in my 6th house, and that's another aspect, harsh aspect to my Midheaven, my 10th house, because I spent so time trying to work practical jobs, my South Node, that I was afraid to take the leap of faith, like I spoke on last week, 12th house North Node, in order to fulfill my 10th house purpose of what I'm doing now. Um, so consider your birth chart when trying to figure out your career. Yes, you can look at your 10th house, but also look at your 4th house and look at your roots. What's in your roots? Because you want your career to be something, or you want what you're known for or what you contribute to the world, your reputation. You want it to be something that is inherently what you're good at. The best careers, or the most successful career you can ever have, is one that you are naturally good at, that you can make out of your natural talents and abilities. Ones that you don't have to go and pick up all these skills for, even though you can pick up skills to enhance them. But what is in you already that you can contribute to the world? Even if you have a job, which is in your 6th house, look at your 10th house and look at your North Node and see what it is that you are really meant to do here. Sometimes it can be the same thing as your job, and sometimes it's not. But you don't have to choose one over the other. And it's best if you can combine them all, because that means you are really in alignment with your purpose in this life. So I hope that this video helped you guys get a deeper understanding of finding purpose in your birth chart by looking at your roots and the products of your roots, your 4th house and your 10th house. And like I said, if you don't have any planets in either one of those, because I don't have any planet in my 4th house, I have a point, Lilith, the dark side of the moon, instinct, inheritance, the supreme bitch, the supreme witch. And Lilith is also an aspect of the moon, and my moon is in my 12th house. Spirituality, karmic spirituality, ancestral karma. So 4th house, 10th house, I also don't have any planet in my 10th house. But I look to the ruler of my 10th house, which is in my 8th house, and it coincides with my North Node as well. So me doing these videos on my purpose, me teaching the things that I teach and showing the things that I show and practicing the things, the spirituality and the practices that my ancestors practices, and doing this as a service to you, because my South Node is in my 6th house, the house of service. All of this means that I'm doing my purpose despite the obstacles. This is a moment to celebrate with me, actually, because I've had a lot to overcome to get here. And I'm still not all the way there, because I'm still growing in it. I still haven't fully realized what I'm really supposed to be doing. However, I'm on the right path. And as I stated in the beginning of this video, I encourage you guys to watch these videos and follow along in your own natal chart. And if you need help, if you need help finding your purpose in life, whether it be your career or your soul's purpose, in order for you to fully actualize your life's experience, holla at your girl. My email is in the description box. You can schedule a consultation with me. I will not turn you down. I don't get tired. I'm never overbooked. I make time for everyone because I'm supposed to help you. Help you. I'm supposed to serve you. Um, and I enjoy doing it, which is why my Venus is in my sixth house. I love to be of service. Um, so thank you guys for watching tonight. And I don't know if I'll do a part 3 of Purpose because I think I beat this dead horse. However, stay tuned. We'll see. Good night, guys.